you very much, Rod, for that introduction, and good afternoon to everyone who's attending this wonderful initiative. And I'm very glad that you invited me, Rod, to be part of your group today and speak a little bit about C4C and all the things that we're doing, which align so much with what you are doing with Citizens Climate Lobby, and especially the Building the Center campaign. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where I live and work and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm today at a friend's place here in Mittagong, and it's a long weekend, as everyone knows, in Sydney. So I do apologize if the connection to the internet is not perfect today, and if I drop for some reason, I'll try and reconnect with all of you. So as Rod was mentioning, I'm CRISTINA TALACKO. I would like to introduce myself outside C4C. Obviously, I also have businesses that I run, and one of them is I'm the owner and founder of a company in food manufacturing. So I have a great love for health foods and organic foods, and we produce everything in Sydney. We export our foods to the world, and we also sell to Australians. And I also am the owner of a couple of retail food shops that promote zero waste and zero plastics, called Naked Foods. So obviously I have a passion and an interest for this area of waste management. I realize that there's a lot of food that is wasted and ends up in landfill. And from there I started developing an understanding about the environment and all the cycles that we go through and all the difficulties that we face in so many countries. Now, I'm originally from Brazil, where today 64% of energy comes from renewables. So I'm very proud of that, being half Brazilian, half Australian. And I look forward to the time where in Australia we'll reach that kind of percentage in terms of renewables as well. And I think we're on a really good trajectory lately. But I'm also passionate about manufacturing and exports and creating a strong local industry for Australia. And I actually don't think that these are mutually exclusive. Supporting the environment and having a business mind are definitely not mutually exclusive in nature, and we can achieve both. Now, with C4C, I've started supporting C4C since its inception in 2016. We wanted to work with the conservative voices within the coalition government to debate center-right ideas and reduce emissions. We recognized that there was a gap or a vacuum in terms of energy policy in the country, and that it's been a very difficult conversation, a very polarizing conversation for a long time. And that's why we created C4C, was really to engage more with our politicians, a voice from within that they could feel there was no risk in discussing and debating ideas on climate and environment, and build more bipartisan support. This is why the group started. So our group is a group of passionate advocates for the environment who are coming from different, professional backgrounds and with different expertise. Most of us are aligned with the coalition government, whether we're Liberals voters or Liberal members, but most of all, we align thinking that we do have to build a stronger, more centered voice in Australia for this topic not to be so polarized as it has been for so many decades. So our aim is really to, through thought leadership, through fostering public and private networks and hosting high-level events that Rod mentioned, that we will achieve a little bit of more bipartisanship within the party. And we exchange a lot of knowledge amongst ourselves, but we also utilize a lot of each other's strengths and expertise. And that's why we have a group of people coming from diverse backgrounds, from diverse areas. At the moment, we have directors in Victoria. We're looking at nominating somebody in Queensland and Western Australia as well. And we do acknowledge that different states go through different problems and different ways of tackling those issues. Our objective with C4C is really to create a much more positive agenda for the environment. So that's across the conservative movement I'm talking, and finding more unity, a little bit more common purpose, and directing that then towards more change. We would like to remove the climate conversation, the climate topic from the political cycles. We think that the conversation on climate and reducing emissions should not be political. It's so factual and it affects everyone, and it shouldn't be part of the political cycles or the political agenda or to advance political motives. And that's why that's one of our biggest objectives, to remove that from the political agenda. And also to lead this mobilized, this motivated national platform for the conservative movement to influence government. Much like in the UK, I mean, and they have a much more successful history in that front. I mean, it is the Conservatives in the UK, beginning from the times of Margaret Thatcher, who really took the leadership ahead in terms of conservation and environment. So they know how to debate these views in a more productive way than we do, but we're trying to achieve that. We're trying to contribute to policy change by mobilizing the center, as your campaign is trying to do. So we do host major events because that's a way of bringing people into the tent. And that's a way of bringing people from different ideologies to come and feel like there's a safe space where we can discuss all these issues in a sensible manner. And I think we've come a long way. We now have 4,000 followers. We've got a number of ambassadors who are conservative, former members of parliament. And we share those ideas, and we try to be as independent as possible and as transparent as possible in terms of who we bring into the tent, and about our funding and about our sponsorship. So the work of our team has progressed quite significantly in the last year, especially with our alliance with the UK through the Conservative Environment Network, which created a caucus within Parliament, which has today probably more or close to 80 MPs in the UK who signed up to their pledge on environment and conservation. Ideally, this is where C4C wants to get to. We want to have this consensus at Parliament and get MPs to sign our pledge and to support C4C on a more formal way. Now, we don't forget to celebrate and promote also achievements of the government when they do deserve that sort of celebration at state and federal level. And for example, we've been working very closely at state level with Minister Matt Keane, who is a very big enthusiast and a very big supporter of emissions reductions and the environment and conservation. And I think he has taken lots of steps forward in that sense. We cover many areas. We don't think that energy is the only area that we should cover, because we acknowledge that waste and water management is very important as well. Green transport, decarbonizing heavy industry, and also sustainable agriculture and biodiversity. So we try to organize events in all of those sectors and have experts talking about all of these areas. And in addition to our broader work, we also have launched recently a group that is dedicated just to the voices of young people, because we believe that they are the future of Australia, and we need more engagement from the youth because they can make change faster than we do. They understand technology better than us, and they adapt to new lifestyles better than we do. So we've launched our youth group last week with Matt Keane, and we already have a lot of following. It's called Youth for Conservation. So right now, what are our priorities? We're going through COVID, so we believe this is a fantastic time in a way to change the way that we used to do things, to look at health and the economic crisis in a more positive way, and find opportunities to advocate to government to support more clean technology, to support an economic growth that is sustainable, and utilize sustainable practices in all the economic stimulus that are about to come, and come up with more recovery packages like other countries are putting forward. So we've been advocating for that, and basically what we want to do, and I think there's a lot of areas that we will interlap with you, with what your objectives are. And one of them is we want to meet our Paris agreements, our Paris Agreement targets. We would like to support the government in developing strategies and solutions for for a net zero economy. We don't talk about net zero being a possibility to be legislated at federal level today, but we believe that there's room to achieve that, even if it's not legislated. We also support investment in ARENA. We think that ARENA is a great vehicle for supporting renewables and new technologies that will help us achieve the net zero. We would like to position Australia as a leader in clean technologies and sustainable practices, and I don't think that's an impossible thing to happen. And we work a lot with the media. We try to engage media that supports those positions. We try to develop and distribute content to our supporters that are positive to them, for the media to change a little bit their polarizing way of seeing things, because I think part of the blame has to be taken by the media as well. The polarization doesn't come only from the politicians and from the environmental groups, it comes a lot from the media as well, because they do have an interest in selling stories, and to sell a story, you have to sell a polarized story to get more attention. But today I was asked to talk a little bit about messaging, because we understand how conservatives or the center rights in Australia function, and we have a lot of relationships with those groups. So I think that the way that we convey messaging is very important for all of the groups that are trying to achieve something in the environmental front. And we're not always experts on messaging, because we tend to speak too much with our inner circle in that bubble. And we all understand each other and our messages, but people from the outside may not be aligned or understand what we're trying to say the way that we're trying to say it. So effective communication is really the key to success for all the organizations in the world, whether they're environmental, whether they're political. How effectively you talk to people is a great measure of how your success will be. So the first thing to have in mind, and I've been attending a lot of courses and a lot of other groups on how to package a message to conservatives. And I've learned a lot recently from the climate outreach group from the UK with George Marshall, who has been really good, and generous with his time with us. But the first thing to have in mind is that the greatest influence on attitude on climate, and this has been proven by many types of researchers internationally and nationally, there are political affiliation. So what determines how you think about climate has a lot to do with your political affiliation and your political ideology. And that's ahead of your gender, income, and education. So it starts from there, understanding people's political affiliations on how to speak to them. As we know, the US is probably one of the most polarized countries in the world when it comes to issues of climate, but Australia is not lagging behind the US. We also have that polarization here, as you all know. But what created that? What created this polarization in Australia? And I think you just have to look at us as individuals, because we are all defined by who we are. So we have our in-group, and that means that whoever is not in the in-group is on our out-group. So we start polarizing from there. We put ourselves in that group, in that box. That means anyone who's not there, then it becomes somebody who's not like us. And environmentalists have historically actively alienated conservatives in a way. Not because they want to, but because somehow this is what happened over the years. And I think this is how conservatives see environmentalists. They think environmentalists like me are over-emotional, that we exaggerate things, that we attack. We're not very good with numbers, we're not specific enough. We're self-righteous or unrealistic. We have unrealistic expectations of the world, and we don't understand real business. This is exactly how conservatives see people who are on the environmental front. And it's been perceived like this for a long time. And that's why it's so hard for them to listen to the message from environmentalists, because they don't take them as people who think in a sensible way, right? So it's a vicious circle, because the left wing has a narrative. When they present it to a conservative, they automatically reject it. And then they dissent, and then they suppress those concerns. And then the left wing supports that narrative even more in a more attacking way because it's been suppressed. So it's a vicious circle. It's really hard to break that. And climate change is understood and believed as a socially constructed narrative conveyed by trusted communicators that reflect their identity and that validate their values. So what would be the strong communication? We know that when we communicate with somebody or with anybody, you will say, you know, who you are, what you care about. Other people like you then will agree or disagree with you. And when you do this, then that's when you start belonging to a group. And then the world becomes how you want it to be in that group. But that doesn't mean that you're attracting or being, you know, able to convey a message to other groups. So it's important to know who the conservatives are. If you want to reach out to them, you understand who they really are and how they think. The Terre Fund Comres survey that I was reading the other day, it found out that the large majority of people identify themselves as center-right. This is in the UK, and this is a 2019 survey. They're saying that 45% of the people they interviewed, they consider themselves in the center. So that's a big percentage. 17% consider themselves on the center-right. 13% only are on the right. And it's similar to center-left, 15% on the center-left, 10% on the left. So really the vast majority is the center, but those voices are not often heard because as we know, the extremes tend to, you know, speak louder and they usually make more noise. It also found that the left-wing people assume quite wrongly that conservatives are not compassionate. So that's an assumption that we have to change. And the Bradford Conservative Association a few years ago did research that explained exactly what the values of the conservatives were. So it talked about center-right frames and identity markers. So I'll just read out some to you because that's quite an interesting research, and Climate Outreach put it quite well, that center-right frames, one thing that center-right people think that they are is that they're balanced. So principles of fairness, proportion, they're pragmatic, they're realistic, they think of themselves as sensible and reasonable, they think of themselves as efficient and effective. In terms of heritage, they love tradition, right? They love social order. They love history and culture. And that's why conservation should and is quite a conservative principle. They love freedom, especially freedom of choice and freedom of censorship and opportunity. Those are things that are really inherent to people in the center. They also love investment and prosperity and growth. Technology is something that they praise, progress. Other things like health are really important to them as well, and comfort, and their children and the future generations. They also like the countryside, nature, health, fresh air. They don't like waste, they don't like dirt, they don't like destruction. So once you understand all of that, you can understand how you can frame your messaging around those areas of health, prosperity, nature, landscape, heritage, and put all of this in a package that is sort of doesn't alienate them, but includes them. And they talk about three groups. You have the supporters, the swingers, or the swings, and the skeptics. And you really should embolden the supporters, and you should swing the swings and appease those who are skeptics. And in terms of one thing that the center-right or the conservatives don't like to talk about, obviously, is carbon price, as you all know. So carbon price seems to be, or carbon tax is even worse. And one of the narratives that the Climate Outreach presented to us that aligns with conservative values on how to present on carbon price is, and this research was done in Canada, is that it's this sentence. So if you put it like this, they will be a lot more willing to listen and to understand carbon price and even to support it, is that carbon pricing is a fair way to share responsibility for the carbon pollution that causes climate change, and to reward the companies that are most efficient and pollute the least. So those words, fair, which comes from fairness, responsibility, sharing responsibility especially, rewarding those who do the right thing. Those are things that really resonate with the middle, with the center. Another sentence that they gave us was, it's not fair that heavy energy users can dump their carbon pollution in the air where we all breathe. Polluters should be held accountable and should pay for the pollution that they force us all. They force all of us to live with. That's another way of putting it. So they also talk about creating pride, because the center-right and conservatives like the concept of pride, showing that they're real champions when they do something right. So one sentence that they put forward to us, which comes from James Murray, was, the challenge of climate change is too important to be left to hair, shirt, and sandal hippies who are nostalgic for the past. Creating a modern, efficient, and productive low-carbon future is the responsibility of business leaders and entrepreneurs, the people who get things done in society. So they find that these are the catchy sentences that appeal to the center. So we need this balanced argument. And of course, you know, when you pitch to different groups, you pitch differently. And that's all about marketing, as you know. And it's important. It's important because you may still achieve the same objectives just by conveying a different message, the way that you convey it, right? And they talk about this balanced debate. So if the left was to talk about climate change, they would be saying climate change is disrupting the natural balance in the world. The seasons are coming at the wrong time, and climate change is a message that something is wrong. Now, if you're going to talk to the center, you just change it a little bit and you would say, I want to keep things traditional. We have a lot of good history and I want to try and maintain the balance for the environment. Keeping and respecting what we do have and keeping society and everything going. It's not about what we can have now and take. It's about the next generation and conserving it and keeping the balance for the next generation. At a minimum, reducing the risks of climate change is a very prudent course to take. If we are wrong and climate change is nothing to do with us, then there's not a lot of harm done. But it's correct, then it's important that we do what we can to correct it. So those are messages that climate outreach taught us how to convey to the center rights. The same, it doesn't have to just be in the climate change area. Let's talk about waste, for example, which is something that the conservatives worry a lot about, even more so than climate change, pollution and waste. So if the left was talking about waste, they would say, you teach your kids that it is irresponsible to waste things, to finish their dinner and not throw away food, and to turn off the lights in rooms when they're not using them. No one likes to see things go to waste. It's just common sense. That's why energy efficiency is important. Who can argue with the idea of doing more with less? This is how the left would put it. Now, how would the center view that? Best way to talk to them about waste. The real principle at stake here about how flagrantly we're using the Earth's resources in this appalling way and not considering future generations. My mother's generation wouldn't waste anything, and I wouldn't want to see things wasted. So you bring it back to a family principle, to that conservative principle of not wasting things. It's almost like a religious thing, isn't it? You don't waste because there's so many people who don't have enough. So it's a principle that we have intricate in ourselves. So things that concern conservatives, they are linked to climate change. It's just that they're probably not aware of it. They're not aware, they're not seeing it the right way, because it's become, like I said, a polarizing topic where they look at the left and they think it's a dialogue that belongs to the left. So they close their eyes and they shut their ears and they don't want to hear about it, but they are things that concern them deeply. The health impacts of climate change and of the bushfires. We've seen a lot of people who were not necessarily climate change supporters not change their minds, but understand that there's a huge risk and that we need to do something to mitigate those risks. So air pollution from the bushfires. When you talk about children not being able to play outside when we had the bushfires, that's something that affected every person in the center. They want a solution for that. Clean transport is something they worry about. Improved diets is something that they want to talk about. But they also worry about infrastructure and planning and heritage, which are big heritage specialists, big conservation, something that conservatives, have close to their heart. They love the old buildings. They want to maintain heritage. They want to make towns and cities unique and special. And so now it's the time to prepare the children for urban heritage that is sustainable for the future. So this is a good time to have that narrative and that conversation with the center right. We need to know how to approach in a different way we've been doing than in the past. And transition narratives are really important. So from dirty carbon pollution to clean renewables, how do you transition? How do we talk about fossil fuels with somebody who's pro coal because they lived in a generation that benefited from coal? That's their reality. They've seen that happen in Australia. They're used to it. How do we talk about fossil fuels? Instead of talking about carbon, just talk about something dirty that is limited. When you talk about fossil fuels being limited supply, then conservatives will think, okay, we can't have something that's limited because we need a bright future, abundant. We need plentiful. We need more. We need energy here forever. So you can't rely on something that's limited. You can't rely on something that is a past technology, right? We're looking at the new future. We're looking at bringing new life, new employment, new jobs. So let's talk about flourishing. And fossil fuels, then, something that you can talk about is that being dangerous. The working conditions are dangerous for health, for the climate. So for safety, for them, that's important. Renewables are safer. They're safer than fossil fuels, for workers and for the people. Something else, fossil fuels are wasteful. Renewables are a lot more efficient, isn't it? Base load fossil fuels is wasteful, but renewables can be very efficient. So you talk about efficiency, about clean air, about being abundant, like I said, and plentiful, and being here forever, not relying on something that is limited and in the past. So that's the narrative for communication grounded in national identity and pride for somebody who's a conservative. So this is a living and working landscape for them, not something to be put in a museum. So there is not one part here in Australia or in any other country that has not been shaped up by the hard work of people when you talk about coal. So I think people here in Australia think, why do we want to destroy an industry that has benefited the economic growth of Australia for so long? And the point is, there are resources that will have an end, and we need to transition, and that transition has to happen a little bit faster than it's been happening. Otherwise, we will not have the electricity at the lower cost that we want. So that's the narrative for them. And what conservatives are worried about when we talk climate policy. If we say climate change is real, maybe my son won't have a job if we shut off the tap tomorrow. That's what they're worried about. So if we start talking too much about climate change, well, my children won't have jobs in the future. What do we do? So they're concerned about that. They are concerned that people talking about climate change are disrupting their livelihood. It will make things more expensive. Everything will become unaffordable in Australia. So they did this incredibly interesting research with the Alberta Project in Canada. They were talking about the oil and gas that has provided many benefits for Alberta, and they're trying to transition. And how do they talk to those communities that were heavily, into oil and gas for so long? The first thing is to be grateful to them and not to talk to them as if they were a terrible industry and then we don't want them anymore and ostracize them and throw stones. So you have to be able to be grateful for the hard work and for what they contributed in terms of the development and what's around, the prosperity of what was there. And then the next thing is to say, well, however, we have become too dependent on this one industry that is almost at its end. And we don't want, we want to see what's the next thing that will make sure that the prices are economic, that there's job security for people. So we need to develop a plan, and the plan is renewable resources that can create that balance and provide the energy to the economy that we need. And these changes will not be easy, but we're here to support. We're here to support this community in this transition, and we need to be strong and creative together. We can rely on each other to solve those problems. And this was a very interesting way of how they mitigated all of those topics and issues that brought up a lot of insecurity and problems in Alberta, in Canada. And we can do the same, use similar narratives here. So there's adaptation narratives after that disruption, and to care and protect people in communities that once provided so much for us. So it's all about the messaging, like I said, and I think we're learning that, and we're changing that amongst the coalition as well, because our politicians see a lot of political risk in discussing topics that they perceive as topics that have been in the hands of the left side of politics. So they don't want to go there because they don't want their electorate to perceive that, they're on the left side of politics, because these are conservative electorates. So they don't want that risk, even though they might think exactly like all of us think. They see a huge risk in that sense. And that's why we're trying to work together with the UK, because in the UK, it is the Conservatives that know how to communicate very well with their electorates on conservation. And we're learning quite slowly, but progressively, on how to do that here. And we're finding that balance, and we're finding that the conversation, as Rod mentioned in our last event with Theresa May, Gladys had not just the opportunity, but she took the opportunity to show publicly that she supports certain things that she was probably feeling at risk before when talking, and now she can actually talk about.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our CCL channel by hitting the button in the top left-hand corner of this screen. Spread the word of CCL by using the share icon to as many of your contacts as possible. Thank you. See you next video.